Alright, Ronan MMA, welcome back to the channel. Now, something that I like to do on this channel is call out the hypocrisy of the mainstream MMA media. Okay, something that there seems to be quite a lot of. Now, if you have been paying attention to the MMA news over the last couple of weeks, I am absolutely positive you would have heard something regarding the class action lawsuit that the UFC was going through and how it settled out of court. Now, I did a video on that last week, and go check that out. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because what I want to talk about is a lawsuit that the PFL is going through, okay? Because for whatever reason, none of these guys that seem and claim to have a serious moral issue with the way that the UFC conducts themselves in terms of business, contracts, fighter pay, and what have you, none of them seem to care about this story even a little bit, okay? So we're going to go over that. We're going to go over when it started. We're going to go over some of the details and what have you. We're going to go over Ariel Helwani having multiple opportunities to segue into a question about this with the CEO of the PFL, the guy on screen right now, that old grandpa looking dude, Don Davis, okay? Ariel Helwani, ever since the PFL signed Francis Ngannou, has been completely and totally unable to get his, like, mouth, nose area, whatever, out of the taint of Don Davis, okay? Don Davis has been on his show about 4 or 5 times in the last 4 or 5 months, and one of those being in studio, right? Has had multiple opportunities to ask about this situation, multiple opportunities in this interview particularly, which just happened 11 days ago, to segue into it because they were covering topics that were pretty adjacent, right? But for whatever reason doesn't want to illuminate this issue when it comes to the PFL, only when it comes to the UFC. Now, I understand that a class action lawsuit is a lot juicier in terms of clicks, views, and what have you. And even, not necessarily, but merit behind it, because you've got so many complainants coming forward and saying the same thing. Whereas in this case of the PFL, you have just one, right? But I think that the stories that are less juicy, the stories with less known fighters, should matter more to people like Helwani, to people like Luke Thomas, who, as I said, claim to have moral issues with the way that these promoters conduct themselves when it comes to business, okay? So we have here an article that was written 5 days ago. So we have here this article written by Zane Simon, kind of irrelevant who wrote it. The date was March 26th, okay? Just about 5 or 6 days ago. Now, somebody who's trying to defend Ariel Helwani might rightly point out, well, this interview that he did with Don Davis was 11 days ago, so maybe he didn't know about this. Fair enough, right? But let's jump to this article, okay? Which was written by an author, okay, by Guillermo Cruz or whatever, dude, at MMA Fighting, by the way, the same outlet that Ariel Helwani works for, in June of 2023. So this story has been ongoing. It has been known for a while, and I, for one, refuse to believe that Ariel Helwani is just ignorant about it. If he is ignorant, it's because he chooses to do so, because he now has this newfound relationship with Don Davis, and he gets these exclusive interviews, and he has this friendly relationship because Don Davis was the guy that essentially saved Helwani from looking like an absolute and total fucking scumbag when it came to the whole Francis Ngannou situation, because had Don Davis not signed him, right, Helwani would have been the sole perpetrator of convincing Francis Ngannou to leave his career for a coin flip, essentially, right? Now, here we have, as I said, we're going to go over this right now. Lawsuit exposes potential predatory PFL contract structure, okay? Actually worse than some of the things that these guys had problems with when it came to the UFC's contracts. Right now, I'm going to read this out for you. I'll quickly do it now. A recent lawsuit from PFL lightweight Manuel Souza has resulted in some interesting legal discovery. A Brazilian court recently ruled that they had the right to hear the fighter's case despite PFL protests over claims that the promotion was unjustly holding him in a multi-year exclusive deal. This is an issue that Luke Thomas, that Ariel Helwani, that all these guys had with the UFC, okay? And there's some answers that we're going to go over from Don Davis later that change entirely when you find out this information. There's some quotes that he says in this interview here that are unfucking believable once you find out this information, okay? So just 26-year-old Souza emerged from the regional scene with a slick 9-0 unbeaten record with all victories inside the distance. In other words, he all finishes, right? A big get for a smaller organization, considering how often fighters in the position end up on Dana White's Contender Series instead, right? Which is exactly, by the way, it's foreshadowing a little bit. We'll get to that. Now, Manuel Souza's contract troubles. There was a reason for that. Apparently, namely, that Souza reportedly thought he was signing a one-fight deal to get a play-in spot on the PFL's next tournament season, okay? He won his fight. They declined to offer him a place in the lightweight bracket, End of story, right? No. As it turns out, Souza's contract allowed the organization to keep him on lock for at least 3 years. Something that Menumito only found out, I'm assuming that's his nickname, when he tried to grab a spot on Dana White's Contender Series later in 2023. Okay? Although he just recently competed for newly purchased partner Bellator, the Academia Octagono talent, okay, has decided to take the promotion to court. His lawyer has claimed his fighter was functionally illiterate when he signed his deal, and that he has since separated from the manager who authored the agreement. Now, that's unfortunate, dude, but I'm not one of these people that infantilize the fighters the way that Luke Thomas, the way that Ariel Helwani does. That's on you, buddy. Get a translator, right? Have somebody that is like fluent in legalese go over your contract, right? And you'd assume that the manager was, but regardless, if you have a lawyer who severely fucks up elements of your case, right, and you're going through court, you decide to fire that lawyer and get a new one, you don't get to use that as an excuse, right? The shit that that lawyer did does not get thrown out necessarily, okay? So that's a pretty similar situation here. I will be critical of him. I will be critical of his management team. But I think we can be critical of everybody, okay? Now, contract details. We're going to go over some of these, which are, in my opinion, like, I don't have a problem inherently with any of these things, right? There are facts that could come forward. There are nuances that you could present that might make me have a problem with these in the future. But as of right now, I don't necessarily see an issue with it, because to me, this just looks like a promoter protecting his investment, something that the UFC does all the time. But the likes of Ariel Helwani, the likes of Luke Thomas, make him out to be, or make them out to be, this like evil, horrible entity that takes advantage of these poor fighters right now. As that legal process moves along, we're getting some interesting information about PFL's business practices, including a look at Souza's contract. Aaron McCragen, which is some Canadian lawyer who I can't stand, but regardless, posted the details from the document on his Combat Sports Law blog. Most notably, the promotion includes language that allows for 2 rounds of automatic 1-year contract extension for their talent. Now, if you would have been paying attention to the class action lawsuit at all, contract extensions is something you would have heard a lot about. Even if you paid attention to the Francis Ngannou situation, this was one of the cornerstone, one of the main factors in that whole situation was that the UFC tries to put fights on at the end of your deal when you're about to run out so they can keep you for longer. They try to extend you. They have a right to negotiate with you before you become a full and totally free agent, right? And it's just funny that, again, Helwani, Luke Thomas, all these people have moral issues when it's the UFC doing it, but you don't hear a fucking peep out of them when it's Don Davis, right? Because Dana White doesn't give exclusive interviews to fucking Ariel Helwani. Don Davis does, right? Ariel Helwani has a decent relationship with the whatever dude, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, which is another thing entirely of itself. What's a few human rights violations, right? He doesn't want to lose these relationships. However, when you portray yourself to be an objective journalist, these relationships should not fucking matter. The facts should matter. Either way, let's get to these contract extending languages, okay? Now, the initial term. Except as otherwise stated herein, the initial term of this agreement shall begin on the effective date and continue through January 2nd, 2024 at the end of PFL's 2023 league season. Okay? Quote, initial term. Now, first renewal option. So they've already, if you sign early in 2023, your contract, even if it was just for one fight, will not end until this date at least. However, after that, they have a first renewal option. PFL shall have the right and option to renew the agreement, first renewal option, for 1 year following the initial term, okay, which is the term that we just went over. So there's 2 years, right? Go down now. Second renewal option. If the PFL has exercised the first renewal option, then PFL shall have the second right and option to renew the agreement. Second renewal option for another 1 year following the first renewal term. So they keep tagging on years to the end of this thing, okay? That's 3. This is for the average Joe Bloke, fucking Souza, 26-year-old nobody, with all due respect, that nobody knows nor cares about and is not making money. And now he's had 3 years of some of the most important years of his career stalled out by the PFL, right? Automatic extensions, okay? The contract also includes language for extending fighters for an additional year if they win the tournament. Wow, sounds awfully fucking similar to the way the UFC handles their championship contracts, right? and another year if they miss out on even part of the season due to an injury or any reason outside the PFL's control. Could be outside your control as well, right, as the fighter. But as long as it's outside of the PFL's control, they can extend your contract for another year. Tore your ACL? Tough shit, buddy. You're back here 2025, okay? What's more, the document states that upon the expiration of the initial / first renewal / injury / championship winning terms, the PFL's contract extensions will take place automatically unless the PFL provides fighter with a written notice of non-renewal, which is to say athletes won't hear one word if they're going to be stuck for another year. Now, the next part of that is what I want to play. The next part of the article, rather than read it to you, I'm going to play some portions of this recent interview that he did with Ariel Helwani to show you, now that you know this information, how fucking slimy this sweater vest wearing grandpa is, okay? And how disgusting his taint must be. But for some reason, Helwani just can't stop coming back to it, okay? So, here we go. We are going to play this, as I said. I've got 3 small portions that I want to play for you guys and just, as I said, illuminate the sliminess of this fucker. And not, again, I want to make it crystal clear. I don't necessarily care about this. I don't necessarily think that these contracts are inherently bad or predatory. I think there's an argument to be had, but I'm not one of these guys that goes off and freaks out about fighter pay, about contracts and what have you. What I do care about, though, is moral consistency. And what I do care about is people like Ariel Helwani, people like Luke Thomas, who claim to be and present themselves to be as like factual fucking arbiters of truth that are completely and totally unbiased. They are just journalists and they were reporting the news to you as the facts say, and oftentimes refuse to acknowledge or admit that they are in fact doing an op-ed. Okay, that's what I have an issue with, because as I said earlier, they have huge platforms, huge amounts of the fan base watch them, and they have the ability, okay, and the influence to sway people's opinions on the way that the sport is ran. And if you read the comment sections, this is very, very, very clear, right? Because you will see people who will unironically say retarded shit like, yeah, you go to the UFC if you want fame, but you go anywhere else for money, which is just not true. The UFC pays more than any other promotion on the planet, okay? Point blank, period. It's just that you hear dumb shit like this, and you know where it comes from, okay? But either way. So here, I've got it in 1.5 speed, just for the sake of transparency. Not because I'm trying to gloss by something, but rather because my attention span's fucking garbage. And if I don't, I need these people to talk a little bit faster, okay? So I'm going to press play, and we'll talk about it after that. Now, here we go.
Ask, I'd be remiss if I don't. Some big news regarding the UFC earlier today in the class action lawsuit. Do you have any thoughts on the news that has come out about 2 hours ago?
So, do you have any thoughts on the news that the class action lawsuit was settled? I'm assuming Ariel Helwani was going to... I'm assuming that Ariel Helwani thought that Don Davis was going to shit on the UFC or have a more direct and specific answer to this, but Don Davis gave a very vague answer, which I'm going to play for you. And now that we know the information we know, it's pretty apparent as to why, but let's continue.
My main thought is what I've been consistent saying. If you're a top fighter or you're an emerging star, it's the best time in the market for you. You used to have one option, really at the premium level. And with the PFL, you have 2. And the difference between 2 and 1 is much more than 1. For all of you who've ever had a job offer, having 2 job offers versus 1 job offer is all the difference in the world. So to me, the biggest difference is not...
Every quest needs a challenge, and every hero needs a sidekick. Choose NordVPN.
The antitrust lawsuit, the biggest difference is the emergence of PFL to be a premium option on a global scale with the same distribution, the same ability to pay, the same great option for you. That's made the most difference for fighters, I believe. But
okay. So he goes on this whole monologue about how he doesn't really care about the class action lawsuit, but he just really likes that there's 2 options for fighters now, that the PFL is on a direct life support from the Saudi government, okay, that they can offer fighters a little bit more money than they previously could have, right? He thinks that that's good for business because there's competition. And I just want to state here, I fully fucking agree. That is the spirit of capitalism, and I think that that is the best economic structure that we have, okay? Point blank, period. So I don't have a problem with what he said, right? But when you then find out the information we went over earlier in the video, and then you hear these answers, they have a little bit of a different tone to them. Because it's not so much that he's big up in capitalism here. It's that he knows he's got fucking skeletons in his closet. And Dana White probably knows this as well. And Dana White knows a lot more media members than Don Davis knows. He could potentially have a story like that signal boosted. I just fucking made a weird noise with my mouth. I apologize for that. Signal boosted to the point where Don Davis now looks like a piece of shit. So I think that Don Davis is more or less just being careful here with how he answers that question, because he knows damn well that they do some of the exact same shit that Ariel Helwani has criticized on multiple occasions, right? And as I said, dude, if you were Helwani, who on multiple times has said how you have like moral issues with the way the UFC conducts themselves in terms of business, contracts, fighter pay, and what have you, you should not be buddy-buddy with this guy, because he is doing the very same thing that you claim to hate. But because he gives you exclusive interviews, it's all fine and dandy, right? And that's something that I can't fucking stand. I talked about moral consistency just a few minutes ago, but when you are somebody who is willing to bend your own values, your own morals for either political or personal gain, I think you're a piece of shit. And it doesn't fucking matter which side of the political aisle or what have you you're on. That is a bipartisan idea, a bipartisan concept. If you will bend your own values, your own morals and shit for personal or political gain, I think you're trash, okay? And that's exactly what Ariel Helwani's doing here. It just is. Now, we are going to skip ahead, okay? I just wanted to show you this just narrative setting a little bit, just the way that he answers that. So Don Davis wasn't all that concerned about the class action lawsuit. Whether he was or he wasn't, I don't know that we'll ever know. I think he's being careful with his answer, and I don't blame him for being careful. But regardless, we're going to skip ahead now to about 21 minutes and 5 seconds in. Now, this, to me, was one of my favorite parts of this entire interview, because this is where they talk about the Kayla Harrison situation, right? Kayla Harrison recently left the PFL to go sign with the UFC. Ariel Helwani asks him about this, and the answer is fucking hilarious. So let's go over that right now.
Tell us from your perspective, what happened with Kayla Harrison? The last time we spoke, you said one fight left. She said on the show recently, like, everything's been worked out. Obviously, she's with the UFC now. What transpired there?
You know, May, and everybody who has heard me on your show, but people know me more, know I'm just transparent, honest.
He's not just transparent, he's honest as well, right? Which is funny, dude. That's funny. Again, given the information that we know now. But also, when you've got a person that has to, like, tell you about their own character traits, typically, this could just be me. I could just be bullshitting. But I'm not inclined to believe them. Your actions should speak for you, right? For your character traits, and other people, in my opinion, should vouch for your character traits. So if you had people that are doing business with Don Davis and they go, yeah, he's super fucking transparent and honest, that's one thing. But when you preface, okay, you preface your answer of a question with, you know, everybody knows I'm transparent and honest, I am not inclined to believe you even a little bit, but let's continue.
I don't know. And I talked to Kayla, and I believe Kayla and I have a very good relationship, and I don't know. So I can only speculate, and I don't really like to speculate about things that are about other people. So one, I don't know. And two, I'm disappointed. So I think unlike Dana, when he talks about other fighters, tends to be negative if they leave, or tends to be negative if they don't do what UFC wants them to do. Here, I'm disappointed. PFL in 6 years has never lost a fighter. And remember, in year one,
we're going to get to that in a minute, but isn't that an insane fucking statement for him to make? In 6 years, the PFL has never lost a fighter, right? But when you find out the details of their contracts, the extensions that they tack onto it, and then you hear that statement, it's like, yeah, you're a fucking kidnapper, dude. Like, what are you on about? Do you know what I mean? You're bragging that your wife hasn't left you, meanwhile she's tied up in the fucking basement, okay?
In year two and year three, PFL was not a strong company. We're a new company. So there were many reasons for fighters to leave, and they never did. Now, did we release up fighters? Yes. Did we upgrade fighters? Yes, because we were always getting better. Never had a fighter leave. So this is the first time in 6 years. And ironically, PFL had never been stronger. And the matchups we had for Kayla Harrison were better than the matchups she was going to get at UFC. She was going to fight Chris Cyborg, which I believe is the biggest fight available in a women's division possible.
Fair statement, but
it's a legacy career statement fight for her. Larissa Panchenko, who beat her fair and square. So Kayla's, call it next 2 to 3 fights at PFL, are harder than they are at UFC, are bigger than they are at UFC. So I don't know.
I just want to point out, about a minute ago, Don Davis says, when our fighters leave us, I don't want to do what Dana White does. I don't want to be all negative and trash those fighters. You know, we left, or they left the organization. It is what it is. I have a fine relationship with Kayla. But also, I'm going to severely imply that the reason she left is because she's got some tough matchups ahead of her, okay? And she might not want to go through those. This is the exact fucking thing that Ariel Helwani, that Luke Thomas, that Don Davis even shat all over fucking Dana White for, implying that, and by the way, I was one of those people. I think it's a ridiculous thing to say, that Francis Ngannou was afraid to fight John Jones. That's why he left, right? People shat all fucking over him for that. Don Davis, in more words, maybe in more political correct language, just said that exact same thing about Kayla Harrison, okay? That's what he did, okay? Insane to me. After he finishes saying he's transparent, he's honest, he doesn't want to be negative towards fighters that leave his promotion, but he doesn't know. And then he goes, she's got tougher matchups here, harder matchups and whatever, but I don't know. No, you're implying that she left because maybe she was concerned about Chris Cyborg fight, or maybe concerned about fighting the woman that had beaten her previously, right? It's just insane to me that he pretends to be this very nice, sweet guy, and he's amicable, and he doesn't want to whatever shit on Kayla Harrison, but then heavily implies that she left because she's got harder fights ahead of her at PFL than she does at the UFC, which is just mind-blowing to me. If you are operating in good faith as a promoter, you could 100% come up with legitimate reasons why somebody of Kayla Harrison's name value might want to go to the UFC before they end their career. Do you know what I mean? Because really, I know what people are going to say, it's a casual take and what have you. Nobody really gives a fuck about you unless you're at the UFC. That's just a fact, right? There are the hardcore fans that will watch every fight no matter what. They know guys at one championship. They know guys at PFL. They know guys at what was Bellator, right? But the vast majority do not. And the vast majority don't care about you if you're Kayla Harrison fighting in tournaments that don't allow elbows, okay? For the fucking PFL, beating girls that nobody has heard of ever. Also, dude, that statement, this is the first time in 6 years we have had a fighter leave us, is insane to me, when this motherfucker knows damn well what his contracts look like for these young fighters, right? For the Souza guy, whatever his name was, right? Manel Souza. He knows what they look like. He knows. And he plays it as if, well, our relationship, we're so kind, we treat them so well, they don't want to leave. And Ariel Helwani sits there and hears all this. As I said, dude, multiple opportunities to segue into a question about this situation. You ask about the class action lawsuit. He gives you a very vague answer. Oh, hey, what about your own legal troubles that you guys are dealing with? I know that there was a fighter in Manel Souza or whatever who was suing the PFL because of blah, 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 blah. Right? Perfect. You can even do it in a polite way. You can even do it in a way that makes Don Davis feel comfortable, where he doesn't feel like you're attacking him. Because I feel like Helwani at this point has built that kind of rapport with Don Davis. Then you ask about the Kayla Harrison situation, which by the sounds of it is very similar to the Francis Ngannou situation. It's only that he goes to explain later they decided not to be litigious with it, right? Because they wanted to just let Kayla go do what Kayla wanted to do. But I think it's because after they go through and say all these things about the Francis Ngannou situation, you don't want to go and do that exact same thing, right? Now, I would imagine Kayla Harrison has signed some form of NDA, which is unfortunate. We might never know the actual, whatever went on between them and the relationship with the promotion as a whole. But it's just insane to me that Helwani listens to this dude spew bullshit, doesn't push back on it at all. Luke Thomas, maybe he has covered this story, who knows, in the last year. I've not seen anything about it, and sure as fuck not to the extent that he covered a class action lawsuit with the UFC. And while you find the odd article, it's not something that is very spoken about. And I just think it's insane to me that if you are somebody like Helwani, like Luke Thomas, who claims to seriously care about fighters, their pay, their contracts, and all this shit, but you only champion the guys making the most amount of money, like there's Francis Ngannou turning down $8 million plus pay-per-view points is not him being oppressed, right? He's got options. This dude, Manuel Souza, probably making what, 10-10 at the PFL, now locked down for 3 fucking years with that company, unable to go and have other opportunities to fight for other promotions, right? Those are the guys that, if you are going to champion this cause of fighter pay and what have you, these are the guys you should be looking out for, dude. Because Francis don't fucking need it. right? He's not oppressed. He's making millions upon millions of dollars. This kid has been stalled out now already for over a year, right? And it's ongoing. And it's not like this is going to get resolved before that shit's over. Like, he's going to lose very important years of his career. And as I said, this isn't my battle. I don't have a problem with it. But when you make that like the focal point of your fucking channel, basically, is to shit on the UFC for the way that they conduct themselves, and then you are unwilling to call out other promoters doing the exact same thing, if not worse, it just shows what a bitch you are and how fucking hypocritical you are and how you were willing to bend your belief system for personal gain. And it's gross, dude. So anyways, like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. I will see you at the next video. Bye-bye.